for being here.
Hi, everybody. This is Kathy L. Murphy. I'm reporting live from Eureka, Kansas at my cousin's house. I'm still up here and I will be going home this week. But today at our Writers Club, which is our International Pulpwood Queens and Timber Guys Writers Club, we are featuring one of our fantastic authors, Eileen Sanchez, of the book Freedom Lessons. And she is going to be doing a fabulous workshop on memoir and fiction, versus fiction. So I'm going to turn the program over to you, Eileen. Welcome.
Thank you, Kathy. And thank you for my friends that are here and supporting me. This is really great. Kathy, you have just been such a supporter from the beginning, and all the authors really appreciate it. And Mandy, you're such a powerhouse. My gosh, you know, what can't you do? I'm really pleased to be here and sharing what I've learned as an author. You know, I'm a debut author at 72 years old. So it's anytime you want to start, you just get going, right? So I'm going to try to share my screen and we'll see how that works. If I still can do it. And if anybody has anything that they want to add or comment on, I think the best place to do is like put a question in the chat box and then we can look at it later. But I can't see you. I'm assuming that everything's good.
Yes,
and everything's great.
Okay, good. Got the right screen up. So women's stories matter. And I already told you I became a debut author at 72. And I want to share how that happened. When my book Freedom Lessons was published, our younger daughter gave me a plaque and it says, "I want every girl to know that her voice can change the world." And just saying that is filling me up, because it was important to tell this story about freedom lessons. And I started it as a memoir. And I'll talk a little bit about that and how that really wasn't working as I continued to write it. But we all have stories, and sometimes that really takes courage to tell those stories. But we need to do that. So I also will be sharing the comments from some authors that are each debut authors as well, after careers in various professions, but I'll get to that in a minute. So why did I write Freedom Lessons? 10 years ago, I was at a professional educational conference in New Orleans. And after a long day of presentations, we went out to Pat O'Brien's, and you can see the mirrored pianos they have on the stage. So it looks like there's 4, but there are 2, and they're dueling pianos, and they'll play songs and everybody's singing along. And of course you have to have a hurricane, and that's what that drink is there. So in between the drinks and the entertainment, I surprised the people that I was with when I told them that I had taught in a small rural town in Louisiana that had closed the Black school overnight on November 4th, 1969. I had rarely shared that experience, but a friend sitting there challenged me to write about that for my daughters and my granddaughters to know about my experience. So that's how it got started. In the story, Freedom Lessons, you find out that the students were retained at the end of the year, and the high school students had a lot of problems. So when I started to write about it, I really needed to kind of go back and do some research, because this experience happened to me when I was a very young woman, and you know, memory is critical, and I needed to beef it up. And when I found out what happened to some of the other people, like my second grade students and the high school students, I realized I needed to tell a broader story of that year. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So this is one of the characters that helped me to tell my story, Frank. I was able to visit the town that I taught in and the school. And that visit filled in some of the history of the people in the community. And one of the opportunities let me to meet the principal of the school, the current principal. They did reopen the school. It was a middle school. And I asked her if she had my class list from that second grade class that I taught, and she didn't. She had no records from that year. She helped me try to find them, but they were missing. All the records from that year were just not available. But what she did know was that her brother was a senior that year, and he wasn't able to graduate from high school. And the Black community, of course, was very upset about that. And they complained, and appropriately, they had some discussions, and they finally convinced the faculty, the administration, that these students should graduate. So I guess I'm giving away some of the story, but her brother, being one of those students, led me to realize that that was an important story to tell it from a student's point of view. So Frank became the character that tells the story from the student's point of view. I also realized that I needed to tell the story from the Black teacher's point of view. And as a young teacher from the North, I wasn't readily accepted. I was an outsider by the local teachers. I was friends with Army wives, but my friends were, well, they didn't work with me. So I did have a mentor at the time, a Black teacher from the school that I worked in. And I'll just clarify that I did teach in the Black school for almost 4 months before they closed it. The woman in the picture there is really a friend. Her name is Evelyn, and I worked with her for over 15 years. And I had always wished that she had been my friend when I was in Louisiana. But Evelyn is the character that I created and named for my friend, also from a teacher named Catherine, and some of the women that I worked with that year. So the research that I made verified my memories and helped me to fill in the story. These are the kind of information that I had used to build my story. I started my research in my hometown library, which connected me to a librarian in Louisiana. And through her, I found all of these links that are on, points on the side, the dissertations, the newspapers. And then I started to take some workshops and read all the different books that are listed on the side. The most important dissertation I found was called "Even the Books Were Separate," and it was written by Dr. Gary Clark, who the same year that I was teaching second graders, he was a sophomore in high school. And so that experience stuck with him for all of his life and his career, and his dissertation included narratives that helped me to shape my story, and he gave me permission to use whatever I needed to fill in the blanks. So I'm very appreciative to him. So for me, I really got stuck. I was writing this memoir, trying to create a story, and I had hoped that when I was writing it, someone would benefit from my story. And I'm glad to say that has come true. My writing group had copies of my memoir, and the woman that was leading the group she assigned us the task of writing from another point of view. And that's when I tried to write it from a student's point of view. I hadn't decided on Frank being that character at the time, but it was the beginning of me trying to write that. So if you look at the signs that you're finally really ready to share your writing, if you're just trying just to write and this is something new for you, or maybe you have an idea that isn't quite working, when you're ready to share, these signs are pretty much true, that you're stuck, you think it's finished, you can't write anymore. Maybe you're ready to write more, but you're excited about the story, you want to share it. Maybe you're bored or you want somebody to benefit. So that's probably when people start looking for beta readers and getting some opinions. Now, when you're ready to write that story, should it be fiction or memoir? If you're thinking about writing something, why don't you just write it down privately? You can, if the chat is available, you can write it there. We're not going to have time to discuss it, but just think of something like a secret or a fear. You witnessed an event that had a huge impact on your life. You discovered a person that intrigued you, something you haven't written on, like just to try that. So we have life-changing events. We have 9/11 stories. We have military experiences, embarrassing moments. And of course, we have the pandemic to write about. But do you really want to reveal your feelings, or do you want to let a character tell your story? Just take a moment. Well, as we go through the slides, I'll give you some other ideas of how you might decide. So these are the good reasons to write it as a novel. I found this Writer's Digest article by Adair Lara, and the link at the top there, if I think either you can copy it or you can search for it to read the whole article. But I pulled out her 10 ways to tell if your story should be a memoir or a novel. So Freedom Lessons is told from 3 points of view. And as I wrote for Colleen, who's the character that told my story, I was able to rely on my memory, but I had to fictionalize and recreate events. In other words, I made some things up. And since I didn't write about my family, which is number 2, that wasn't a big problem. But after my family read my book, we all realized that they never understood my experience of that year. And you can just take a look at the other reasons that weren't critical for me, but they might be for someone else. And those would be good reasons to write it as a novel. So, good reasons to make it a memoir. Memoir does sneak into Freedom Lessons. Some people do strongly identify with my story and the events that happened in that year. I've presented or spoken with people that actually have experienced it. And in fact, one of the Pulpwood queens sent me a message on Facebook that she actually connected with a teacher that is in the book. I gave his name in a conversation and she recognized who it was. So she said that it was a Black teacher and had moved into her high school. And it was actually Dr. Clark's same high school. And she said that he, as an English teacher, he made such a difference in her life. He was her favorite teacher. So there were some people that really connected personally with the story, even though it was fictionalized. So other people can strongly identify with your story. maybe you are writing to explore questions about what happened, and you want to have it open and just for discussion. Fiction isn't easy to write, but I think memoir is harder. So that was my choice, but let's see. What do you think the best way to tell your story is? The idea that I asked you to just think about, memoir or fiction. Did one of the reasons I already presented ring a bell for you? Maybe not. I have some other authors that I'd like to share their thoughts about why they chose either memoir or fiction for their books. So here are the authors that chose to write fiction. And these authors actually, except for Gail Woodson, the rest of them are Pulpwood Queens, and they're all debut authors. And they made their decisions. But let me give you some explanation about their stories before I tell you more about their decisions. So Rita's book is about Private First Class Judy Talton, the 14th of September. And Judy celebrates her 19th birthday by secretly joining the campus anti-Vietnam War movement. But in doing so, she jeopardizes both the Army scholarship that will secure her future and her relationship with her military family. And Judy's story speaks to the clash of young adulthood, early feminism, and war. Janae's book is from the perspective of a seasoned photojournalist, Annie Hawkins Green, who barely survived a Taliban ambush that left her military escort dead and a young Afghan girl dying. And then, let me see, my notes are in my way. I might be going off there. Gail's book is Sarah Whittaker has always been an obedient overachiever, but she is burned out. She's training to be a surgeon, but that's stressful. When her fiance offers her a solution, which is to take a break at a hospital in Africa and climb Mount Kilimanjaro, that's some break, isn't it? She jumps on board. When she backs out, she embarks on her adventure alone. Julia's book, No Names to Be Given, is told from 3 women's perspectives. And this story is based on actual experiences of women in the 1960s who found themselves pregnant but unmarried, pressured by family and society to make horrific decisions. And she tells that's her story. Each of these authors' stories are based on their experiences, and but they chose to tell them as fiction. So as we go through the reasons that they chose, I want you to think about the one that you considered maybe writing about, and think about it more as you see what these authors decided. So I asked the 4 authors to this question: why did you choose to write your personal story as fiction? And I emailed the questions to them and asked them if any resonated for them, and if so, to share their thoughts. So these are the things I asked them to consider: to have creative freedom, to build necessary story pieces for the reader, to protect friends, family, and myself, to provide various points of view, to retell fictionalized events from my experience in second or third person, or to make it more compelling than the plain truth. So here's their answers. That first one, to have creative freedom, to develop characters, scenes, and story. The speech balloons might be hard to read depending on your device that you're looking at, but this point strongly matched for Gail, Julia, Rita, and Janae. Gail's and Rita's and Janae's main characters shared their professions. Gail is a surgeon. Her character was a surgeon. Janae is a photojournalist. Her main character is a photojournalist. I'm an educator, like Colleen is in my book. Rita and Julia's shared their life experience, but they hid it in fiction. I always knew the impact that the year teaching in the Deep South had on my personal history, but when I realized how significant the event was in the history of our country, I realized I was a witness and felt a responsibility to share my experience. I had to tell more than my story, so that required some research for me. So I'm not going to, can you see those the text in the balloons well enough, Mandy? Well,
I think we're all on mute, but yes, I can see them fine.
Okay.
Yes, Eileen.
Okay, because I don't want to read all of them, but they're important comments to take some time to read later, because I have a lot more to go through. So I needed to have creative fiction. I needed to have that. So to build necessary story pieces for the reader to understand the protagonist, Colleen, that's what I needed to build necessary story pieces for the reader. I had to show how a 22-year-old young woman from New Jersey wound up in the middle of the end of segregated schools in the South. One point of view wasn't enough. I'm an educator, write what you know. To tell the whole story, I had to write what I didn't experience, but only witnessed. Rita says that she had to help her characters get to where they needed to go. Janae wanted to insert food and culture and its impact on people and her protagonist. Gail used her logic to fill in the gaps. Julia was able to build a broader story than she would have written as a memoir if she had written it the 40 years earlier when she first found her birth mother. So her story is very personal as well. A little bit of protecting ourselves in these, and that's the next slide. So to protect friends and family and myself, that's a reason that you might want to tell your story in fiction. I found Colleen's story the hardest to write because I did have to protect myself. I had to revisit and take a deep look into what I did and to what I didn't do, what to reveal and what to skip. Like in my writing workshop, we had an assignment to write a sex scene for our work in progress. Nope. I didn't want to do that because I wanted to share this story with my grandchildren. And my husband is actually one of the minor characters in the book. So some things just weren't appropriate. I also struggled with revealing the actual town that I taught in because I knew I wasn't going to create a positive image. And I struggled with revealing the town that I grew up in, which in some circles is considered a sundown town. If you don't know what a sundown town is, we can talk about that later. Now, Rita did write a sex scene that she has to deny really happened to her. When people realize that her story is based on her experience, then they take everything to be fact. And she has to explain that from time to time in her presentations. Both Rita and Julia were strong protectors of their mothers when they wrote their stories. They didn't have a relationship with their mother that they wanted to really publish, but they found a way to share important facts that helped to drive their stories. I love how Rita put characteristics of real people into her story. There was one woman that always said, "Oh, wow." So you figured out who she was every time she showed up. And then there was another guy they called the Wizard. So she used real people to add personality and quirks to her characters. So authors often say, "Look out, friends, you might wind up in my book." So this is to provide various points of view. Now, that was a very strong reason for me to write it as fiction, because two of my main point of view characters are African American. Their story and their experiences are composites of facts that were in newspaper articles, historical references, the dissertations, and even personal interviews. But their fictionalized experiences were essential to build the necessary story pieces to understand Colleen's experience. So it was a shared story. Both Rita and Janae decided that a single point of view served their stories best. Julia's story has multiple points of view to share the experiences of the child that she shares the story from a child's point of view, and the two mothers that she actually, her birth mother and the mother that adopted her. Another reason to write your story as a fictionalized story is to make it more compelling than the plain truth. When I started to write mine, it really seemed kind of boring. It was just from my limited point of view. And as I did the research, I realized that when I went to the South, I didn't realize that there were still segregated Black schools in this country. I was one of 3 white teachers in a K-12 school. Creating fictional characters to tell the whole story allowed me to share facts of that year that most people don't know. We all went to school, and readers can connect with that. We will have emotional reactions to the unfairness in the story. Rita reminds us that reality hurts, but she wrote hers to really for her character to have more than the reality in her story. Gail says that numbers don't have the same emotional impact that details have when reading about one baby's death. So Gail, as a physician, had experience with the death of a baby in Tennessee that has nothing to do with the location of the story, but she took that personal experience, and instead of just quoting these numbers that just don't make the point, she took a personal experience and gave it to a doctor in Africa. Janae's personal experiences helped her to recreate authentic situations for her characters with real emotion. These authors used facts wrapped up in emotion to draw in the reader. More compelling than the plain truth. To retell fictionalized event from my experience in third person, creating characters helped me to tell Colleen's story, which is based on actual events of 1 year in my life. There were many things that I didn't understand about that year. I did a personal Black history study, and I wove what I learned into Frank and Evelyn's background and their point of view. And I'm still learning about things even today. Gail drew from her medical experience, training, and working as a doctor. I already explained to you about this newborn that was born in Tennessee. they might have a better chance than newborns born in Africa, but one baby's story is now immortal. Julia dug deep into heartaches and joy to share personal, life-changing, emotional events as she educated the reader about adoptive children that were adopted and adoptive mothers in the 60s. So, which of these 6 reasons to write your story as fiction speaks to you? And they are the same ones that I just worked through explaining from the author's comments to me. Oh, how's my crown doing? So, these authors chose to write memoir. Donna Keel Armour, Solo in Salentino, is a personal story. It's about simple truths of life, truths that she says I had tucked away in order to fit in, to be the perfect child, daughter, sister, wife, employee, friend, and so on. For years, I didn't give voice to myself, so it was important for her to write nonfiction, to speak my truth, to hear my own voice. Those are her words. And to walk on a path that she chose for herself. She was 67 when she took that solo trip. She was not young. She was not looking for adventure or romance. She was searching for self, and she thought it was important to share that journey with others. Eileen's book, Hippie Chick, Coming of Age in the 60s, it takes place in 1963, and we're brought along as Eileen becomes immersed in the unfolding of the 60s during the earliest days of sexual freedom, psychedelic drugs, the jazz scene, and rock and roll. It's a deeply personal story of how one young woman manages to survive and even thrive in the face of whirlwind experiences coming at her. So they wanted to have their voice. They were telling just their story, and they wanted to have their chance. So thinking about the topics that you as an author, writer, might want to write, if fiction wasn't ringing true for you, maybe memoir was, maybe memoir is the way it did for Donna and Eileen. So I did the same thing to ask these 2 authors, why did you choose to write your personal story as memoir? And these are the points that I asked them to consider. I emailed them the points, and they sent me back their thoughts. So I'd like to read these. So they considered focusing on elements of real life, personal experience, intimacy, emotional truth, for self-discovery, to really examine your own experiences, to create a narrative thread that ties your personal experiences together, to objectively identify moments of growth or trauma. It allows you to tell your own story, to give readers the raw experience of a true story, to make sense of the past. Those are all the things that if you think you want to write as a memoir, you can consider these points. Do any of them speak to you? So to focus on elements on your real life, like personal experience, intimacy, and emotional truth. I think you can read the comments from Eileen and Donna. When you write a memoir, you want it to be as true as you can make it. With fiction, you have a much larger body of water to play with. Those are not my words. They're Pat Conroy's words from A Low Country Heart, Reflections on a Writing Life. But Eileen and Donna give their reasons best. Emotional truths. To honor my sister. Truths tucked away in order to fit in. They really were writing to heal and to examine themselves. That might be important for you. So for self-discovery, to really re-examine your own experiences. And again, you can read Donna and Eileen's thoughts. But here's a point that I had to work on before I could write my story as historical fiction. I had to examine my experience of a difficult year as I adjusted to the unfamiliar culture of a small Southern town and its unwritten rules. Everyone struggled through the mandated school integration. I never forgot about the 32nd graders that I was forced to keep back in second grade, 2 weeks before school ended. I always believed I let them down. Throughout my career, I've advocated for students that were misjudged and underestimated. Writing this story helped me to find my voice, even though it was fictionalized. It gave me the courage to speak out and tell my story. So sometimes fiction can also meet this criteria for you. So do you need to find your voice? And how can you do it? Memoir or fiction? Here's another point to consider. To create a narrative thread that ties your personal experiences together. Even in fiction, I had to create a narrative thread to tie 3 seemingly unrelated characters together. I found those threads in family. Family offered each of my characters security, identity, and values. I found it in the individual actions of each of the characters, of the courage that they each displayed through the story. Memoir writers have great courage in using their experiences for others to find their truths in the words of another. Another point to consider writing as a memoir is to objectively identify moments of growth or trauma. These comments speak for themselves. The antagonist was in me, Donna said. She really needed to discover who she was. And Eileen, when she was done writing, she felt so proud of the girl that she was, tenacious, never giving up. So it can really help heal you as you write a memoir. It allows you to tell your own story when you write a memoir, to give readers that raw experience of the true story. And these comments jump out at me. Write a true story, to write it in present tense. It comes from a first person point of view. It's a healing process. Not having a personal journal from the year that I wrote about limited my ability to write it as a memoir. The interviews and the narrative dissertations I used to understand the events I lived helped me to write fiction. Frankly, for me, memoir got too painful. Writing in third person about my experience gave me an outsider's view. It allowed me to see the young woman I was, to understand her and to forgive her. I don't know that I could have done that with memoir. I needed the other characters to help understand that. The last point is to make sense of the past. And again, Eileen and Donna, they say it so well. And the words that stand out for me are to heed my own voice and to realize that I was loved. When they looked back at their lives and wrote about them, it helped them to see those things. So here are the 6 reasons in a list of why you should consider writing your story as a memoir. So which one of them speaks to you. These are resources and articles that I use to create this this workshop, and the links are live on the PowerPoint, and I think that they should be when you even on the YouTube, but if they're not, I can provide them if anybody wants them, because these are just all different articles that pretty much I've summarized them in this presentation. This is just the list from the masterclass link. There is a masterclass that you can also take, but it gives you the advantages to writing your story as a novel. They were the ones that I presented first. And then the advantages of writing your story as a memoir in a list with a little bit more detail. And these are the website links for the authors that I shared their stories, and I thank them for sharing their thoughts and giving me permission to share their thoughts and their books. I hope that you will take a chance if you haven't read them. And as I said, they're all Pulpwood Queens, and we'll have to get Gail on board, but she lives in Canada, so we'll see about that. So I just want to close with Pat Conroy's quote again. Fiction contains memoir, memoir contains fiction. From a low country heart, reflections on a writing life. And I'm going to stop the share. I see that there's some chat questions that I can't read. Oh, hi, Eileen.
Yay.
Oh, yay. Great. So Eileen maybe has some thoughts. I hope I presented your story well. And I see Kathy had some quotes, some thoughts on the side about what she Kathy Ramsberger wanted to include both points of view. So anyway, Eileen, I'm so glad that you could join us. It was kind of tricky to do the PowerPoint and have a conversation with you, but what did I leave out? What would you like to share with the people that are listening? And this is going to be on the Kathy's YouTube channel too. So
I better watch my words.
I love the way you tell the story. So
Yeah, don't hold back.
don't hold it.
Oh gosh. I was telling the truth to myself as well as to the world, because I didn't really know what my story was. So I was revealing my struggles to me, and it was almost like it was my younger part who was speaking to my adult, and I was the witness. And one of the quotes you said is that I just was really proud of her.
yeah.
And I couldn't imagine not doing it as a memoir, because it was my true story. And I tried to drop down and go as deep as I had to. And in fact, it was very painful. And I guess I'm just a glutton for punishment, but I needed to feel all that. It was part of the healing process. So yeah, I guess I'm just somebody who likes to go deep. And
well, it's part of your work too. You
Yeah,
help other people. You're a therapist that helps other people to do that. So it was an honest. I think it probably would have been very hard to write it as fiction. Then people would be guessing that it was you, and you wanted to. As you said, you were proud of who she was.
I wanted I think part of the healing process for me was to be seen, you know, and boy, have I be careful what you ask for. No,
You know, Eileen, the reason why I picked your book was I was always fascinated with that time period because, you know, growing up a child of the 70s, you always, you know, I love the music of the time and everything, but I didn't really understand it. And it wasn't until I read your book that I got a realistic view. We've kind of, with Woodstock and everything, we've kind of made that era kind of romanticized it. And
Yeah,
I think your book showed people how it really was. And I found it very enlightening, and I can't thank you enough because that's a part of history. We need to know personal experiences rather than this romanticized fantasy of, you know, free love and everything. I thought you did an excellent job. And the fact that you have now championed your life by helping others with your therapy. Amazing story. Everybody needs to read Hippie Chick. Yeah, absolutely.
thank you so much, Kathy.
Yeah.
Well, it's also, you know, as a writer, and then there's a lot of me in my fiction, but by writing fiction, you know, I don't have to tell it all. And even if a story is more than halfway true, nobody knows that. I can decide how much I want to let people know. So I admire and respect people that write memoir because I know how scary it's got to be and how hard. Because like Eileen's story, I love freedom lessons. And I did not know really when I started reading that it was really based on your life, you know, when I first started reading it. And then it's like that just was made it more interesting to me. Because then I could really put a face. I think I kind of knew really before I knew, just from reading and just like, because it was so well written and honest. Like I knew that this was you in this story, right? Like just the setting and the stuff. But yeah, you couldn't have written that one as a memoir because you needed all the other
Right.
voices. So it's like it's interesting how it's not, you know, it's not as easy as like, oh, I'm going to write this or I'm going to write that. Really, there's a whole lot that goes into it and the writing of it.
Yeah, and that's where, you know, when I started to just to think about putting a workshop like this together, it was because like I didn't go through that when I was writing. I did go through the process, but I didn't understand it. And you know, I thought, well, maybe it can help other writers just either know that yes, I made the right choice as writing a fiction or memoir. And gee, I didn't think of it as those reasons, but like revealing yourself, everything in when somebody writes, there's always pieces of who you are, and you can't, but you don't have to. They can create the story and give a personality to a character and such. So it's for different reasons how you want to present your story. And you know, Eileen, you know, to protect myself, I said that, you know, and to protect other people, that came through in all of the fiction writers, that the books that I talked about, like Rita's book, you know, talks about she didn't have a relationship with her mother. She didn't want her mother to know that she wrote the book.
Wow.
You know, she wrote the book her mother had passed, and like because her mother does play the opinion of the mother in the book is her mother, and she didn't want to betray her mother, I guess, you know, because her mother would have known that it was her. You know, nobody really knows that. So, you know, and you reveal things in the books, not even realizing what you're saying. So a funny story about my book, if you've read it, there's a part where Colleen's somebody delivers a yellow frosted birthday cake on her birthday, and she says that it reminds me of my mother's. My mother used to make this cake for me on my birthday, and my favorite cake. Well, after my sister read it, she said, "Mom never made that cake. I used to make that cake for you." So even though it was a very slight, she was kind of insulted that I didn't give her the credit for making the cake.
And it was fiction. Wow.
And it was fiction, but she knew. She knew who really made the cake, because that was true. You know, that's so you don't, even when you're not intending to do it, you know, you're writing, I think your friends and your family always want to know, is that me? You wrote that about me, didn't you? You know,
Well, it was at a book event for my first collection of short stories. There's a story about a little girl who's going through this horrible stuff happen in her life. And she's hidden away in her little favorite spot, and she has her favorite things with her as a painted teacup with yellow roses. And she thinks of her grandmother, and it always smells of like tea cakes and chicken and duck. My older sister had never read it. We're at the book event, and that's the one that people are like, "Oh, read from that story." And it's really crowded. And me and my sister have not the best relationship. I mean, I love her and I know she loves me, but you know, I mean, we're just really different. So she's videoing it. She's making a big deal over the thing, which I thought was kind of funny because she's not even read them. But as I'm reading that story, she's recording it, and you hear her go, and then she's like, "That's Baba." And then she was like, "That little girl in the story." So then it really, you know, I thought, even though it's fiction, it was enough in it that was true. And then so we were able to talk about stuff because our lives just were completely different, even living in the same house with the same parents.
Right.
Only 2 years difference. You know, we had almost two complete different childhoods. It's odd.
Yeah, everybody has their own reality, don't they? You know, in my story, I feel like I felt a little bad that, you know, I said things about my mother and about my father and my ex-husband and stuff like that. But I think by the end of the book, if you get through the whole book, I really have a turnaround that they did the best they could, and they were, you know, really loved me. And, you know, I've had some comments from people that I was too kind to my ex-husband. And part of it is he is my daughter's father, and I didn't want to trash him, you know. And so we still have a relationship. And he said that what I wrote about him was very accurate. So he was okay with it. The one that I trashed the most in the book, I changed his name.
Did he figure out who he was yet?
He knows who he is. He asked me to change his name, and I said, okay.
You know, when I was writing, when I knew I wanted to write a book, I've been writing a fiction book for my whole life. It's not published. But I had an interesting situation where I had a publisher come to me and said, "I want you to write your story of how in the world you took this little hair salon bookstore book club to Good Morning America, Oprah Winfrey, and all the stuff, and the story behind the story." So I was asked by a publisher to write that nonfiction memoir. And so what I did, because you put yourself out there when you do that, I attended every memoir workshop I could go to. This is perfect for anybody to begin with. And then I consulted some of my, you know, author friends that wrote memoirs that I respect, Jeanette Walls and Pat Conroy. And Pat Conroy and both Jeanette Walls said, "Write your truth, but you don't have to put it all in there." And so, and I wrote it because I wanted people to know the whole reason the Pulpwood Queen started was because books saved me. And so it was very important that I make it true, because I want people to know that this isn't just a job for me. it's a mission in life to show that if you read and you read well, you can come out of any situation that you were dealt with as a child. And so that's why I wrote The Truth. And so the fiction book will be written. It'll probably be my swan song, but it's based upon all the crazy things that happened in my life. I couldn't talk about my memoir because most people who write memoirs really only write 10% of what really happened, because some of the stuff you don't want to rat out on yourself, right, Eileen? Because everybody I've ever talked to that wrote them, they said, no, I just wrote what I could handle, right? You write what you can handle, because there's a lot of things. Yeah.
What my audience could handle, you know.
Right. Right. Because some of the things we don't even like to even think about that, you know, we may have done in our past or choices we made. And so you can deal with that in the fiction book. So, but I had a very interesting situation. So and it was very hard. And I actually sent copies to all my family of the reader's arc. I said, now maybe you can understand why I'm the way I am and know how much I love you. And it backfired.
Oops.
Totally backfired. In fact, if you're writing a memoir, I wouldn't share it with anybody until it's published because, you know, my mom called the publisher and tried to stop publication.
Really?
Yeah. So it had to have a whole legal vetting. And the things that you would think that a person gets upset about, I know that Jeanette Walls told me in her book, the part her mother got most upset about was her eating the chocolate bar in the, not eating the chocolate bar in the closet when her kids were starving. She got upset about the way Jeanette described her driving. And like,
Yeah.
really? But the fact that she ate a giant chocolate bar when her kids were starving in the closet so they wouldn't see her and didn't share it with her children, that would have upset me if I was a mother. That didn't bother her at all. It was the driving.
It's funny, I've had so many friends over the years have said to me, and then people that I just meet, they'll say, you need to write your memoir, like you need to write your story. And I do want to, like I really want to. And I love this workshop, Eileen. It's so good because now you've got so much information in here and helpful stuff like, you know, to think about when you're doing, like, I'm going to go back to this. Thank you. But when I always said to my friends when they were saying, you know, to write your memoir, I have to find a way to tell the story. I'm going to have to break it up because it feels like I've lived 10 lives, but to tell the story where I don't look like a victim. Like I don't want people to feel sorry for me because they're like, if I went from my first marriage, I was 15 and it's horrible things happen. Terrible things happened. It was sad. We were poor. It was bad, but there are so many good things though. You know what I mean? It's like, I've got to make sure that I can write it where it doesn't just sound like a sad, sad story because it really, I wouldn't change my life for anything. Like everything that happened, you know, so that's the hard thing, Eileen, like that. Was that, you know, writing a memoir was like, did you struggle kind of with that? Like where you didn't want to look like you were being a victim? And I mean, I'm going to tell all my stupid stuff I've done too, because that's part of it. And it's like, I'm not really worried so much about looking like a dumb because I was dumb. I was 15. It's like,
yeah. I mean, we all were doing the best we could at every moment, or we would have done something else. But to not put that in the story, the stupid stuff, you know, that's what people go through. You know, they can relate to that. The point of it is that I moved through that and I became this, you know, that's the point. So you have to kind of show that dark side before you can come to the light.
I have a question. I think that, you know, if you have a story, if anybody has a story that they want to tell, you know, the intention of publishing the story is different than just writing the story.
Good point.
So you could write the truth. I mean, that's how I started. And you know that, and it was only because people were encouraging me to tell it a little differently that it gave me the freedom to do that. and to think that when I started to write it, I never thought that it would get published. I was writing it to get the story out. Then I was having fun because it was creative and I was learning a lot. So there's all different steps along the way. I don't think that, well, I don't know, Eileen, when you wrote yours, did you intend it to be published or
No.
from the beginning?
No, I did not. I was writing, first I wrote many journals. I had books and books of journals that I kept through my life. But also then when I started a writing group, it was just to learn how to write, and to try to get some of these stories down. But I really didn't know that it was going to be a book. My writing teacher was very encouraging. What's her name? Linda Joy Myers, she's the president of the Memoir Association, and she really encouraged me that this was a story. And I went,
Yeah.
oh, it's a story. Okay.
Yeah.
I
Well,
really,
that's what happened to me too, but the other way. I was in a writing group and just trying to, I was retired, I had time. And then someone encouraged, my writing group encouraged me to write the story. So I think that that's another point. I don't think that's really in the points that I presented, that maybe you just have to write it.
that's right.
Not necessarily think about publishing. That's a different step.
It is, and you don't want to write for an audience. You're right.
Oh, that's right.
Memoir,
Yeah.
you don't want to write for an audience. You're writing for your own, learning,
Well,
your
and
own
that's
healing.
with my friends that have said, you need to write your story because you'd help so many people. Like that's what they tell me. But that puts pressure. That's the pressure because
No
it's like,
kidding.
oh, then you don't want to be like, I don't want to be the victim, and people think, oh, you've done so much, and it's like, whoo, and I've made so many mistakes too. So it's like, you might not think I'm so inspiring when you see all the mistakes I made, so it's like, so yeah, I mean, that's good, but just write it. And then don't think about it as going to be a published piece. Just write it and then see. Because that's hard.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
the
I wrote-
title of the thing, my friend said, she's like, because I told her, and it's a story that's, if I were to just tell you the story, every one of y'all would be like, oh my gosh, that's awful. We were laughing so hard because I made it through. So since we know we're laughing when I told the story. And another friend too, a guy said, you're so lucky all this horrible stuff's happened to you. It's made you such a good writer. So we're laughing. So the title would be, my friend Mary Beth said, it'd be funny if it wasn't true.
But if you notice, if you come from dysfunction, we always laugh about those crazy things that happen. But it's also important to say, when I was asked to write this book, the book that I wrote wasn't the one that was published. I just wrote my story. And then my editor, who was Amy Einhorn, I don't know if you are familiar with her, but she did the help and she was fabulous. She said, well, you've told your story and it's an incredible story, but you haven't explained why books saved you. So that's when I had to go back and do the edit, the changing. And and finally I said, okay, I'm just going to tell it all. And she said, okay, maybe you told a little bit too much. And so she took a lot of it back out, and it went back 30 times back and forth, just trying to get it exactly right until we were both comfortable with the story. And I reread it not too long ago. I'd almost forgotten a lot of things I wrote. And I thought, yeah, but I think it's time to write another book, because I think there's a lot.
Kathy.
Yeah. So that's, and I know most people aren't ever asked to write their story, but that's what happened to me. And then I got, published it was bought by Time Warner, and then they got bought out by the Hachette Media Group. And, it was a real learning experience. But I didn't tell as much as I think I should have. So the next book, The Pulpwood Queen Goes Back to School, will further the story. And it's not a tell-all book. It's just learning from all the mistakes that you make, how to be a better person and be in service to others. I think that's really important, that no matter what life shoots at you, you need to learn, be kind, be in service to others, and then everything's okay. I mean, if you're helping other people, that's important, you know, and that has to come from the true story, not as a fiction. The fictional story, I'll get all the other stuff out. And it'll be finished someday.
Fun though, because when you're writing fiction, you can put as much truth in there as you want. Nobody knows but you.
Well, Pat Conroy's wife, Cassandra King, who's a fabulous author, I picked her more than any other author, I think, out there. She said to me, you write the story the way you want it to end. And I love that. I love that in fiction, you are in control of the story. In nonfiction, you're really not. You know, you have to go by what happened, the truths.
But we all have our,
yeah,
we all have our view of what really happened or what was the true story. I mean, I tell my story a whole bunch of different ways. I chose to go the high road, you know, and look at the successes, but it's not necessarily, I could tell another sad story on top of that one either. So,
well, one of the things
right there.
One of the things I found out when I wrote my book is I wrote the story that my mother had always told me about my mother and father. So then I sat down with my dad and I said, I'm going to read to this is going to be hard to read to you, but I want you to tell me this is what I was always told. And he goes, that isn't what happened at all. So then I told the story I was always told, and then the story my dad told. And then I called my mother and asked her to tell her story. And she said, the story I told you is the truth. So my mother and father's, so I put that in the book because I wanted people to know that it's kind of like Big Fish is one of my favorite books by Daniel Wallace, because the son, his dad has always told him these fantastical stories. And he goes, just tell me the truth, Dad. And the dad said the most poignant line I've ever heard in a book. And it was fiction. He said, this is the truth to me. And see, that's the thing. You can talk to your siblings and you'll all have a different story. That's why it's called a memoir. It's your memories. But I did try to, do that, but I could only get one side of the story. The story I was told and the story my father told and sister told, I put in the book, but nobody else would talk to me. So they can write their own book. There you go.
Yeah.
I love that line. If you wanted me to write nicer things about you in the book, you should have been a better person, you know.
Oh, I love that too.
And I love that too, but I'll tell you, we don't always know what happened. You know, you have to give people, I've learned now that I'm 65 that our family does the best they can with but
we're talking about ex-husbands. That's different than family, than real family.
Well, we won't even go there. So wonderful workshop. Wonderful. And I will go back and I will research all those links. I want to go back. You know, I'm not a real good multitasker. I'm really focusing on what you're saying. So now I'll go back and focus. This is going to be a wonderful tool for authors, whether they're writing fiction or memoir, to go on the YouTube channel and watch this. Watch it 2 or 3 times, people, because you learn something every time you reread a book. I reread books all the time. I would love to go back and reread both of your books, Eileen and I guess it's Eileen and Eileen. Because people go, do you reread books? And I go, I do. Because the next time I read it, depending upon the mood I'm in, I'll pick up a lot of different things. And the same way.
I appreciate that. Yeah. I like when people reread my book.
I do.
My book is a fast read. And they go, I've had people say to me, oh, wait, I got to go back and read this slower. You know, there's a lot in here.
You read the first time and you get one. It's the same way with movies. I don't know about you, but there's this one I was telling my family about and friends that I've watched 8 times. And every time I watch it, I pick up something different. Every single time. I pick up something different. And I think it's storytelling. And that's what happens when you read stories over and over, just like the Bible. You'll read a story of it when you're 20 and you get one point of view, and then you read it at 40, then you read it at 60. Reread those books. And that's why the Pulpwood Queen books are all listed in my book. And we hope people will read them forever. So, gosh, thank you, Eileen and Mandy. This was a great Saturday. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the chance to share the story about my story, but, and I hope that, you can stop the slides too, because some of them, the points are there, and I didn't want to read all of the quotes, but the author's quotes in the balloons were really, I had hoped that people could just take time to read those and think about that. And I really appreciate all the authors for
you'll have to tell, is it Gil Woodson, the Kilimanjaro book? We don't have a copy of that book, do we, Mandy? No. You'll have to let her know. She needs to send us a copy, because I would love to read it.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah.
And then Eileen, so people can pause on your slide, so that's good. But could you send in an email the links to the other authors, and I'll post those separately, because they won't be able to click on those in the video.
Yeah.
But we'll add them to the
Good idea, man.
comments.
Great. Yes. Great. So, and thank you, Eileen, for joining us. I appreciate it, and sharing your story with us too.
Thank you so much. You are the epitome of the educator, bringing all this together in this way.
And all the research. Thank you so much. Happy Thanksgiving. We're all thankful for you. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. All right. I'll send that. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. We'll have it up on the YouTube channel today. So we'll see it there. Kathy L. Murphy on YouTube. And thank you, Eileen, Mandy, Kathy, all of you. We'll see you down the road. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.